Hi everyone, today we are talking a lot about Black Lives Matter, and I'm going to start us off by showing you guys how you can make your own art piece in respect of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement.
I'm starting off by doing a rough portrait of George Floyd. You can't see it very well because I wanted to do it a little bit rough and quite light just in case I made a mistake. And now we're moving on to the lettering, which is pretty rough, and I wanted it to be that way because sometimes fighting for justice is messy and I wanted to represent that bit in the letters. And as you can see from the portrait, I'm just focusing on darks and lights and building that up and then gradually adding more detail and more colour. And then once I was happy with that, I moved back onto the lettering and I added some grey tones around the outside. I wanted to make them a little bit more bold and give them a bit more definition and life. And then we're done.
So Black Lives Matter movement is a campaign in America, and it started in 2013. And basically, they just campaign for equal rights for Black people across the country. And this is just in day-to-day life, in things that they experience, and also in politics and the systems that they have, such as police, education, healthcare. And it covers a whole multitude of things, and it's really amazing. And we just want you to help you to understand what's going on in the news at the moment and what all these protests are. So the Black Lives Matter started in July 2013, but actually for centuries, like hundreds and hundreds of years, people have been campaigning for equal rights for Black people in America. In fact, in like the 1860s, there was a whole civil war, right? Because the country like split over whether or not it should be legal to own Black people as slaves. It's pretty bonkers, right? And this is me using my American history degree working in a church. What a dream, who knew? Throughout the whole history of America, people have been protesting for equal rights for Black people. And this is because they've been treated as second-class citizens ever since the country was founded. First, they were forced into slavery. Then they weren't allowed to own property, have good healthcare, education, they weren't allowed to vote. So protests have been pivotal in gaining these rights. And this is just a few. So in 1960, Greensboro Sit-Ins, basically some Black people just went and sat at a lunch counter, like in a restaurant. They sat at the lunch counter because they weren't allowed to sit there because they were Black. Okay, all they did was they just sat there to prove a point. And do you know what happened? Well, apart from the fact they got attacked for doing nothing apart from sitting there because of the colour of their skin, they were eventually desegregated and they were allowed to now have their lunch there. In 1963, the famous March on Washington happened, where 200,000 people marched through Washington DC, and then Martin Luther King did his really famous "I Have a Dream" speech. And they were protesting, they were campaigning because they wanted equal access to jobs, because they were economically at a massive disadvantage to white people. And you know what happened? In 1964, because of so much campaigning and protests, the 1964 Civil Rights Act was passed, and this basically made discrimination illegal based on your skin colour, which was a massive, massive achievement, big step forward. Over the years, there's been so many protests campaigning for equal rights for Black people in America, and in 1963 in Birmingham, Alabama, which is in America, they marched because they wanted equal rights to public places. Okay, so what they did was they went on a march, and then eventually the police turned quite violent and they started using police dogs and water cannons. But how does this apply to today? On the 25th of May 2020, a man called George Floyd was murdered by a police officer, a white police officer. It's really sad, it's really heartbreaking, the fact that he was killed, and people just had enough, because this has been happening for years and years. People had enough, so they started protesting and they started marching. A few riots happened, but on the whole there have been peaceful protests, and actually across the world people have been protesting and standing up for the Black Lives Matter movement. And their aim in this protest is to stop police brutality towards black people. And this campaign still matters today because black people aren't treated equally. And actually they fear for their lives simply because of the colour of their skin. And now, as a white British woman, I'm never truly going to understand what a black American goes through on a day-to-day basis. I'm never going to understand that because I'm just not in their shoes. But as Christians, Rob's going to talk about this more in a minute, it's our job to stand up for people just as Jesus did. We can protest and march and campaign for equal rights because you know what, as Rob's going to say, we're called to love people and we need to stand up for people.
The Bible speaks a lot about equality and how we should treat each other. For this video, I wanted to focus on Jesus. Jesus preached not only to those with a high religious status, but also he taught and healed the poor. Jesus also spent time with tax collectors as he ate with them and spoke with them. Tax collectors were looked down on in society and weren't liked. Jesus treated everyone with love and compassion. You may have heard of the story of the Samaritan woman at the well in John's Gospel chapter 4. Well, the first striking thing about this story is that Jews and Samaritans hated each other. Yet Jesus decides to take a detour in his journey to go to Samaria and to meet this woman by the well. He speaks into her life of hardship, and her life is changed after the experience. Then a whole Samaritan town hears the good news about Jesus. Jesus loves everyone. Jesus came to save all of us and to die for all of us. For Jesus, every life matters. As Christians today, our response to inequality should be to love others and to stand up for them. There are many videos out there from churches on how to respond to the Black Lives Matters campaign, but for our video today, our central message is to show love. I thought to end, I would quote Dr. Martin Luther King from his famous speech. "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the colour of their skin, but by the content of their character. As Jesus did, let us love our neighbour